We start in the home of the Who's, a race of small rat-faced mole-type rodent creatures with pointy noses, what fucking love a festive holiday and also rampant materialism. And before you can say, holy commercialisation of Christmas, Batman, we meet a grumpy hairy hermit called Jeremy Corbyn. Whoops, I meant the Grinch. And this fella is more miserable than my dad, having to sit through my shitty school nativity play back in the day. And he's totally had enough of these Who fuckers with shit haircuts coming up to his gaff and pissing about in his front garden and shit. So naturally, he throws on a disguise and heads down into town, as the legendary Sir Anthony of the Hopkins tells us via rhyming narration that the Grinch's heart is 2 sizes too small, which is partly why he hates Christmas so much and presumably why he looks so fucking jaundiced. Anyway, irked that everyone's having a bunch of fun preparing for the town's jubilation celebrations whilst he's left up in his giant fuck-off mountain to mope around all day and night, he infiltrates the local post office and messes up their mail. Beautiful. But is soon caught in the act by a 6-year-old child, also with a stupid haircut. And this Cindy Lou lass is so shocked that she falls into a nearby sorting machine like a right Wally. And it looks like it's curtains for the #1 cutie pie, what later grew up to be the smoking hot lead singer of a pretty cool band with banging tunes. But luckily, the Grinchy fella's dog called Max soon convinces him to save her from getting squashed flatter than Prince Elrond's face. Mainly by biting his body. And after he gets totally triggered by her thanking him for doing something nice and saving her frigging life, he promptly channels his inner minimum wage retail shop worker and hastily wraps her up like a cheap gift on the shop floor whilst leaving lots of holes in it. Later, he returns back to his Highland shithole and entertains himself by making prank calls to Cindy's dad and tormenting poor Max with an invisible stick, before chilling out in front of a small wall and getting into an argument with his own echo. Okay. Because turns out he's super lonely underneath it all, and seemingly can't even win a roast battle with his own ego. The next morning, little Cindy Lou asks the local coffin dodgers all about his tragic backstory, but they first go on to outline how babies are made in this universe, and which just seems to involve random infants being parachuted in from the sky in small baskets. Which is weird, because my dad told me babies are made when a mummy and daddy loves each other very much. And when Daddy comes back from the pub at 1 AM feeling randier than Pete Naughty's Russell Brand, he shoves his spunk sausage up Mummy's love tunnel and out comes a brand new sprog 9 months later. Well, as long as she eats a decent diet and don't spend too long on TikTok getting convinced to go to some place called Planned Parenthood. Bruh. Anyway, turns out an infant Grinch was accidentally delivered to Whoville because reasons. But unfortunately, he landed in a small tree and was stuck outside in the freezing cold for the entire night. Which totally explains why he then grew up to be a miserable bastard what hates life. I guess that means that Shia LaBeouf must have also been an adopted tree baby too. So the grannies took him in and raised him totally solo. But something was off about this little fella, because he sat about eating crockery and drawing super violent pictures and shit. And before you can say, I'm no psychologist, but I think this kid's going to grow up to be a friggin' school shooter, son, we're soon told how he developed a crush on young Martha, who was already dating the local fat kid, what would later become the town mayor. So naturally, the fatty bum bum bully fella totally bullies little G about being 8 years old and already having a beard, and presumably being a hairy mutant weirdo freak with green skin. And after he bats down a raging lob on when he's touched by a girl for the very first time, he sets about making her a Christmas present. But just ends up cutting his own face while shaving and then getting humiliated in class all over again. And even by his own freaking teacher. Liberties! So also naturally, he has a full-on meltdown and smashes up an innocent crimbo tree, before then running off into the mountains to become a lifelong hobo tramp. And before you can say, did no one call Child Protective Services given there was an 8-year-old kid living in the local hills all alone for decades? The adult Grinch tries to suppress his painful childhood memories about being roasted in front of his peer group by a fat bully and also his own teacher, by smacking himself in the face with a small mallet. Later, the town mayor asks the local residents for their annual Jubilation Cheermeister nominations, and he just can't believe that Cindy Lou suggested that hairy green hermit fella what once tried to get off with his bird back in the day when he was a tubby fat bully kid. And after she convinces the people to support her choice on the basis of racial diversity and inclusion of weirdo green hermit folk, The mayor hilariously tries to nullify the town's votes by pretending their Book of Who Bible has a clause in it that prevents his constituents' preferred candidate from even being considered eligible to run. But given how blatantly dodgy and corrupt that would seem, he soon abandons using Democrat Party tactics to interfere in local elections. And given the Grinch never seems to come down into town, except for that one time he just did that very night before, he decides to let it slide, and So Cindy heads on up to his Grinchy gaff to tell him the good news, and naively enters the isolated lair of a nudie naked hairy stranger. But luckily, he's not a Nancy pervert, despite looking and acting creepier than Jimmy Savile on literally any BBC show back in the day, and instead just tries to scare her off so he can be left alone already. But he totally fails, and she presents him the invite to be this year's holiday cheermeister and stuff, because she reckons if he can just reunite with his old mates and get over all his childhood trauma, he might finally start to like Christmas again, and maybe even cheer up a bit. But he only agrees to go after she tells him he's won an award, and after flushing her down some sort of poop chute like yesterday's turd, he throws on some fancy clobber what he nicked from a passing yodeler. Not a joke. And before he can talk himself out of going, his own dog flushes him down the garbage chute before landing slap bang in his old floozy's boobies.
Nice.
And after poor Martha recovers from her own raging lady boner, the Grinch goes on stage to get his award, but instead gets reunited with them old wrinklies what raised him years ago, and who promptly stick him in a shit jumper and then in the chair of cheer. And this year's cheermeister is soon force-fed all sorts of pudding and made to do silly dances around the local Christmas tree. And much like me having to endure 15 rounds of charades with the in-laws every 25th of December, this is this fella's idea of hell and totally makes him want to die inside. Anyway, the cheermeister soon receives a special gift from the mayor, but shockingly, it turns out to be a beard trimmer. And this Grinch fella soon gets super triggered by this naughty microaggression intentionally perpetrated by his childhood bully. And before he can say, "I don't know why you're smirking, mate, because it's probably not a good idea to piss off a mutant monster bloke with zero ties to the community and then give him a sharp weapon whilst also standing in close proximity to the guy what fucking hates your guts," the mayor then doubles down on his insane provocation and asks Top Toddy Martha to marry him right in front of his arch-enemy's face. No! So naturally, he totally snaps and tells them all how they're all a bunch of capitalist stooges and soulless corporate mugs only caring about presents and shit perfume gift sets on Christmas, and then shaves off a bunch of the mayor's hair for shits and giggles before proceeding to incinerate the local Christmas tree. Because bar humbug, bro. So after the Grinch is racially discriminated against by a passing taxi due to the colour of his skin and then angrily carjacks a poor couple to ride off home on top of a small motor, the town mayor with another terrible haircut totally bollocks Cindy Lou for trying to be nice and include marginalised people in their festive activities, and says over-emotional fannies, aka typical women, always ruin everything, and this is exactly why we can't have nice things. Or some shit. So now more pissed off than Piers Morgan at a vegan buffet, the Grinchy boy decides to build a makeshift sleigh and totally cosplays that phony fakey Santa Claus fella. Mainly so he can break into people's houses and steal all their stuff and stuff. And after fat shaming himself by getting stuck in a small chimney, he indeed nicks all the town's presents, what they ordered on www.lastminutecrapforyou.com, before gobbling up their grub and smashing up their gaffs for good measure. But suddenly, that Cindy Lou kid appears and asks the random midnight intruder, who's currently molesting her family's Quimbo tree, what the true meaning of Christmas is. And before he can say, "I dunno, but I bloody better get that new Spider-Man game this year," she asks this Yuletide ghoul what she somehow thinks is fucking Santa Claus, despite him having a green face and the rudest to boot. Not to forget about that Grinch fella up there. You know, the hermity Hobo Tramp living up in the mountains with a small dog what he taunts by pretending to throw invisible sticks every night. Because she thinks he's sweet, and totally wants the oppressed person of colour included in their community events, given she's a raging libtard and said events inevitably have diversity quotas to fill. And which is super hard, given she also seems to be living in some sort of ethno-state where everyone in town seems to be a Caucasian honky.
The Lord President, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every chair of every public body is white. That is not good enough.
But he just says enough with all this gay shit, because I've got more presents to rob. So proceeds to send her back to bed before hauling his sack of stolen goods to the top of a large mountain, and then attempting to push it off and she. And after the townsfolk wake up to see their village trashed worse than a typical Saturday night in Chicago, Cindy's dad tells the naughty mayor that they don't need no stinking presents or non-incinerated Christmas trees to be jolly, because they have all they need right here with family. Meanwhile, the Grinch starts to hear the townsfolk all singing cringy songs around a replacement Christmas tree, and just can't believe they found the spirit of Christmas and true holiday joy without even opening up an Xbox Series X or a half-price slow cooker from Argos on Christmas morning. And shockingly, he soon has one of them epiphany things and realises that the Christmas spirit don't really come from a man-made store, but from somewhere deep in our hearts and shit. And speaking of hearts, his one then starts to grow 3 sizes in his chest, before he proceeds to cry his eyes out in the snow like a little bitch. Which is weird, because when my granddad's heart grew 3 sizes in a day, he just passed out in his apartment stairwell and then left us with a $3,000 funeral bill. Anyway, now filled with joy and presumably a sufficient blood flow now his heart is working as it should, he saves a stolen stash of gifts and also a stowaway 6-year-old girl from tumbling over the ledge and doing that dying thing. And soon returns the presents back to the townsfolk, whilst almost running over a specky 4-eye still in his pyjamas in the process. And after a police officer turns up, also in his pyjamas, given a hairy homeless hobo has come back to the scene of his own crimes, having committed grand larceny and attempted hit and run of a nearsighted gammon and now presumably legally parking in the town square, he totally confesses to being the one what stole Christmas, and promptly apologises to everyone before surrendering himself to the coppers. But he's just super confused when the local filth don't immediately slam him on his front and slap a knee on his neck. But is then rather ecstatic after Top Totty Martha gives the Mary's ring back and then dedicates her heart to a childhood crush what's prone to unpredictable and volatile outbursts of rampant violence. And before you can say, this'll then will, we end with the townsfolk all singing around the local Christmas tree and filled with the holiday spirit, as a redeemed Grinch hosts all his new mates in his freshly decorated and homely hobo cave. Before we pan out to find that this was all taking place inside a friggin' snowflake for some reason. And that's it. That's the movie. Though my favourite part was rewatching this flick now as a grown adult and realising the baby Grinch landed outside a swingers sex party. God, no wonder he was so messed up. And I certainly don't remember that being in the Dr. Seuss books. Unless that's in fact where 2 in the pink and 1 in the stink actually comes from. But anyway, that's a plot and that's your lot. Considering in that mail thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this flick in the comments if you have time, and I'll see you in the next one.